Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our AGU AGI Heads and Chairs webinar. My name is Leila Gonzalez from AGI, and joining us today, we have on the line Pranoti Asher, who's the Assistant Director of Grants and Education Programs at AGU, Eva Kostyu, who's the Program Manager for the AGU Bridge Program, and also joining us online here in the chat is Christopher Keene, who's the Director of Geoscience Profession and Higher Education at AGI.
Hi everyone, my name is Eva Kostyu. I'm the program manager for the AGU Bridge Program. I'm excited to talk about the program today and answer any questions.
And I'm Pranoti Asher. I'm the assistant director at AGU. I work with Eva very closely, and we run all aspects of the AGU Bridge program, but we also have other programs at AGU in the higher education space, including programs related to careers and mentoring, and of course, supporting department heads and chairs. So with that, Eva, please.
Great, thanks Pranoti. So before getting started, I like to just sort of ground us in a few ideas before talking about the Bridge program. And many of these are somewhat self-explanatory, but I'll go ahead and run through them just to, like I said, ground us and sort of frame today's presentation. So the first is identity is complex and intersectional. So I'll be talking about ethnic and racial diversity in the geosciences, but I want to highlight that these identities, of course, only capture a portion of how someone shows up in the world. And any individual person, of course, holds intersecting and multiple identity markers that overlap in the way that they experience different spaces. Secondly, language matters. So how we talk about things is important and often imperfect. So in general, I'll be using the term historically marginalized people or historically minoritized groups when I'm speaking today, because that term acknowledges the system and structural oppression experienced by these communities. In the context of STEM education, I'm specifically referring to people identifying as Hispanic, Latino, Black, African American, American Indian, Pacific Islander, Alaskan Native, or Native Hawaiian. I recognize that grouping these identities together under the umbrella of historically marginalized is imperfect and fails to capture the diverse lived experiences of people who identify with these groups. Third, numerical data can only capture part of the story. So we'll be discussing some numbers around graduate degree attainment, but we know that numbers don't tell the full story, and we have additional knowledge around people's experiences in graduate departments, stories of toxic cultures, harassment, and microaggressions. And that's something that we'll keep coming back to, that numerical data kind of with an asterisk. Fourth, strive for equity and diversity and representation will follow. So while a goal of our program is to increase the number of graduate degrees earned by students from historically marginalized groups, the bigger picture goal is to push geoscience graduate departments to adopt best practices. I'll quote from our research hub partners. Racial equity occurs when graduate programs reconfigure the structures, cultures, and the system in which they are embedded to ensure historically marginalized communities have the opportunity to participate and thrive. So even though I'll be talking about numbers of graduate degrees, I encourage you to place that information in the larger context that goes beyond simply recruitment and representation. If we're sending more students into toxic environments, then we are still not doing our job. And lastly, continuous learning is necessary. So as you all probably know, equity is not a destination or a project we can check off as complete. And as such, it requires continuous learning, both at an individual and organizational level. And I say this as an encouragement to all of us, and also, to include myself in the Bridge program in that as well. We're evolving and learning all the time in response to new information. So with that, I hope you walk away from today with a greater understanding of the AGU Bridge program, including, some of our program impact. If you're a department that's interested in applying, I hope you'll know a little bit about what that looks like and what we're looking for in our partner departments. And then I hope you also walk away knowing that you and your department can be an agent of change. So even if you're not in a position or interest of ability to apply to the Bridge program as a partner department, I hope you'll still get something out of today's presentation, whether that's inspiration or ideas for where you can start. So to dive right in and help set the stage for why the Bridge program was created, I wanted to share two data snippets that many of you may recognize. The first is a data brief from our colleagues here at AGI, who found that as recent as 2019, less than 10% of PhDs were awarded to students from historically marginalized groups, and less than 15% of master's degrees. And just to further drive home the point that we have work to do across the educational spectrum in attracting and retaining students, less than 20% of bachelor's degrees were awarded to students of these identities. So while the Bridge program is focused specifically on graduate education, I think it's important to keep in mind the entire educational spectrum. And many of you may be familiar with another article by Bernard and Cooperdock, which explores the lack of change in this type of data over the last 40 years. So they specifically looked at PhDs. And as you can see from this snippet, included some exploration of intersecting identities, pointing out that particularly low representation of women of color, and also that faculty of color held only 3.8% of tenure positions at the top 100 geoscience departments. So this slide is just a visual representation of data similar to what I just quoted. This data is from 2013 to 2017 and shows across several fields of physical science the low rates of graduate degrees awarded to students from historically marginalized identities and the drop in percentage when moving from bachelor's to master's to PhD. So you'll see geoscience there on third from the right. And this graph underscores, again, the work we have to do across the educational spectrum. I'd like to point out that none of the bachelor degree percentages in this graph rise above 20%. However, like I said, the Bridge program is specifically focused on graduate education and moving the numbers of graduate degrees to be on par with that of bachelor's. So the approximate number of degrees needed for closing that gap, so to speak, is around 55 master's degrees and 30 PhDs a year. Obviously, these numbers change year to year, depending on the number of graduate and undergraduate degrees awarded in a given year, but just to give you a sense beyond the percentages listed here. And one last point with this slide that's also noted there in the bottom right-hand corner. This data is aggregated across Black, Hispanic, Latino, and Indigenous students, which is not the recommended approach for organizations to consider. So if this is something your department hasn't done yet, I'd strongly encourage you to look at your demographic data when it comes to applications, offers, and graduation rates, and to disaggregate that data by different identity markers, both racial and ethnic identity, and also, as we mentioned, intersecting identity with gender and other information that you may have. And the next slide, I'll pass over to Pranoti to talk a little bit about where we fit in a larger picture.
Great, thanks, Eva, for setting the stage here for us. So again, so the AGU Bridge program sort of sits in sort of the midst of this larger project called IGEN, or Inclusive Graduate Education Network. It's an NSF-funded project and is made up of many, many moving parts. One of the moving parts of this project are the disciplinary societies. So we have 5 societies here: the Astronomy, the Materials Research Society, ACS, the Chemistry, the Physics Society, and ourselves. And not all of us have bridge programs, but we work in different ways, either through bridge programs or having communities of practices within a couple of these societies to sort of advance sort of this thinking of how we can make our departments better, what kinds of practices we should adopt in our disciplines to support students that come through our program. So again, the ACS, APS, and AGU have bridge programs, whereas the other 2 societies have communities of practice. Eva just alluded to sort of our research hub and inclusive practices hub. These are 2 entities that work very close together. The research hub, as you can see here, conducts research and distills that very complicated social science and education research into briefs and documents that are very understandable by physical scientists, and that's what they share. They work closely with the inclusive practices hub, which sits at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and they translate those into workshops. So you have the research, you have the simplification of that research, and then the sort of the action on how you go about doing those things correctly in your departments or in your institutions. Along with that, we have SIMMER, which is, the sort of all about mentoring. And SIMMER has worked with sort of the national labs and different societies to create products and training and workshops to help departments do a better job at mentoring students in general. So for example, SIMMER has created a brand new mentoring curriculum for field studies in the geosciences. This came through the collaboration because of IGEN. Last but not least, West Ed is our evaluator, and the point that Eva was just making, this is a very dynamic sort of process here in sort of getting evaluations, learning something about what could be better, and then adapting and rethinking about how we want to change or what tweaks we want to make. So we very much take the advice and the feedback that we get from the departments to make changes in real time annually to our programs and processes. Eva, if you could go to the next slide. So collectively, we are all the IGEN. So the Bridge program, the AGU's Bridge program, has sort of two key pieces. One is, as Eva mentioned earlier, advancing those equitable practices in those graduate departments. And many of these things can be adapted to whatever situation you're in, whether you're coming from an undergraduate institution, you're in a research lab, you're in a national lab or a federal agency. Those principles can be adapted very well to different situations. Not only is there materials and trainings and information about these equitable practices, but also there is a pathway for students who are interested in going to grad school to come through those departments that have been identified as doing these good things and having these wonderful practices. So we have so far over 50 departments that are Bridge partners, and they have done a lot of good things, and they're still continuing to do good things and learn new things so that they can recruit and successfully graduate their students and with either master's or PhD degrees. If you're a student, if you know students who are interested in going to graduate school and through the Bridge program, it allows just a different way to apply to grad school. They submit one application, it's free, and their applications are considered by all the Bridge partners, whether they're in AGU, ACS, or APS, depending on what the student is interested in. So students get accepted through the Bridge program, and they're enrolled into their graduate programs, but they're also enrolled as part of the Bridge program. They receive support from their department, but also some very specific support from us as AGU Bridge program staff. Next, please. And I think I turn it over to you, Eva.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to dive right into talking about students in the program and what that student experience is like, as Pranoti was starting to say. But I also just wanted to mention we have a bunch of links to share. I was trying to open the SIMMER training. I couldn't get it open, but if we don't share links in real time, we'll get them at the end there. So let me move forward here. So as Pranoti was saying, for students, they can submit one free application, and it is through a shared application portal across the IGEN Bridge program. So the AGU Bridge program is modeled after the Bridge programs at APS and ACS, and all three of us share that application portal, which means that applicants can submit one application for consideration by Bridge program departments at one society's Bridge program up to all three if they have interdisciplinary interests. I won't read through all the eligibility criteria here, but I do just want to point out that at this time we are US based only. And each year Bridge partner departments sign up to review these student applications. So typically in a given year, not every single department is reviewing applications, but due to capacity and funding availability. However, well over 50%, the majority of departments look to recruit students each year. And so as Pranoti mentioned, any student recruited and accepted into a graduate program via this application is automatically enrolled into the AGU Bridge program and then receive support from their department-specific program as well, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. So the AGU bridge programming is a bit like the umbrella over what's happening in a given department. So when students are enrolled into the AGU Bridge Program, they're entering a community of students that span fields of study, educational goals. Some students are pursuing master's degrees, others PhD, and they're located across the US. So each semester we have a virtual event for students. We also do a virtual onboarding for new students in the summer before they begin graduate school. The semester gatherings are usually informal, offer a chance for students to connect with their peers at other departments. We've also held career panels and other informational, more formal events. All students receive AGU membership and the opportunity to join our online Slack community where we share out resources, both AGU and non-AGU, that we share out as relevant to the students. For any students attending AGU's annual meeting, we do have an in-person meetup, and Pranoti and I at Bridge staff are available as needed throughout the year. So this varies from student to student, what type of external support they may be seeking from us here at AGU. And this slide is a snapshot of students currently participating in the Bridge program and 2 student testimonials. I'm not going to read through all of this line by line, but in summary, because I know there's a lot of information on here, there are currently 54 students at a total of 28 departments, and we have 8 students who have graduated with their master's degree. So the numbers over on the left-hand side there next to the little student icon is indicative of currently enrolled students, not the original cohort total, and the full cohort total information is available over there in the box to the right of that. So as you can see, the number of students recruited via Bridge has grown each year, and we're currently in the midst of another cycle of application review for the fall 2024 enrollment. So we're always excited to see what new students will be welcoming to the program this summer. And sorry, I know this is a very text-heavy slide, so I will read out some of this. I know it's a little tough to read, but we did want to highlight some findings from our external evaluator. Pranoti mentioned West Ed. So 2 successes I'd like to highlight are listed there at the top. Over 75% of faculty members indicated that their department's admissions and recruitment practices have changed due to their involvement with the Bridge program. And that is not necessarily limited to recruitment via the Bridge program. So like we said, not necessarily every department will recruit a student, but because of the practices and changes being made at the department level, faculty are reporting that their involvement in Bridge has sparked this wider change. And then over 80% of students agreed or strongly agreed that their mentors treat them with respect, provide constructive feedback, and are available when they need support or guidance. However, for the challenges, fewer students agreed or strongly agreed that their mentors are sensitive to institutional racism, recognize their cultural identities influence their mentoring practices, and recognize cultural differences can impact their mentor-mentee relationship. As was the case in the previous 3 years, the fewest number of students agreed or strongly agreed that their faculty mentor broaches the topic of race or ethnicity with them at 22%. And nearly every student from all 3 disciplines described feeling imposter syndrome. Students mentioned feeling an inherent need to prove themselves to the faculty and students at their institution, in part because they were admitted into a Bridge program as opposed to other avenues. So the challenges here really underline the importance of training around culturally sensitive mentoring, implicit bias training, and other trainings that bring awareness to how identity influences power dynamics, specifically within mentoring relationships. And I think the second bullet point is directly connected to the first here. So several scholars have challenged the idea of imposter syndrome and instead talk about how institutionalized racism and systemic oppression may be experienced as imposter syndrome, but the issue with this is that this puts the burden of a fix on the individual rather than the system in which they're operating. So one of our trainings we hosted through iGen for our Bridge department leaders was Christy Pichicero, who has labeled this discriminatory gaslighting. And I'll drop a link to an article from her in the chat. But this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, looking at the context of graduate and geoscience education beyond individual recruitment to include people's experiences once they're on campus. So next we'll be talking about bridge partner departments, and I'm going to hand back to Pranoti.
All right, thanks, Eva. So similar to, how the students engage in the Bridge program and how they might apply, let us walk you through some of those things that, you would be involved in if you were to apply and be successful as a Bridge partner. So in the 5 years that this program has been around, we have 53 departments across the US that are Bridge partners, that we're very proud to call Bridge partners. And of those 53, 17 are minority serving institutions. Once a department becomes a Bridge partner, of course, they go through an onboarding, they sign a MOU, making sure that they continue to do the things they said they would do when they did when they submitted their application. And then we engage with them in a variety of ways, not only just AGU, but also with the larger project or IGEN. So we have virtual meetings, typically once a semester. Sometimes we've had more than one. IGEN has department leader meetings. We've had department leader meetings. We have give them opportunities to attend workshops that are either being held by the Research Hub or the IP Hub or SIMR or whatever have you. Together, the IP Hub, the Inclusive Practices Hub, and the Research Hub have sort of formed a consortium, if you will, called Equity in Graduate Education, or EGE. And for the longest time, they were holding sort of a quarterly journal club. And so it was a way to read important papers that had lots of practical advice, and how would you distill that and use those learnings from research and incorporate those in your department or in your institution or in your program or your lab or whatever the case might be. So that was really, really powerful. Of course, the Geoscience department chairs of those Bridge partners become part of the AGU Heads and Chairs community. Many of them come to the annual workshop that we have at our annual meeting, and they engage in these webinars and so on and so forth. Again, discussions happen on a semi-regular basis, once a semester or so, with other Bridge leaders across the disciplines. And so those are some of the virtual meetings I was talking about before. And of course, if they're interested in recruiting students, then they go through the common portal, very much like the common app for undergraduate degrees. This is the common portal that we have where the student can apply at no cost. And of course, if they take a student, if they recruit a student into their graduate program through the AGU Bridge program, then we ask them to give us sort of semester progress reports, basically just saying, yes, the student is doing well, student is still enrolled, and they're making progress, and here are some highlights of what that student has done. And of course, they have to do annual reports if they've taken students. So if you could go to the next slide. I think, Eva, you're going to take over that part now.
Yep, thanks, Pranoti. And so in addition to that kind of like high level engagement that's offered to every department, I just have a few things to point out, about individual departments. So each department's bridge program and initiatives will look a little bit different, and they're specific to their local context and also in response to their departmental resources, opportunities, and needs. So for example, departments in areas where housing is a particularly challenging issue may have developed housing lists or facilitated connecting current students to incoming students to make sure students are connected to housing resources. More rural departments may have a greater need for transportation support. So I know one department was working on helping to alleviate that with like a shared campus vehicle system. So the message here being to be creative and responsive to the needs specific to your department. And one way to get started with this is through student input. So we have several departments who have students in formal or informal roles as graduate liaisons or representatives who may sit on committees or otherwise provide input. Many of our departments have done surveys or climate surveys or conversations or other forms of feedback that they're seeking from students. Another thing I want to highlight is faculty training. So like Pranoti mentioned, through iGen, we've been able to offer several mentoring related workshops. And we'll drop some links in the chat at the end of organizations you can request trainings from for your department. And given the feedback from our evaluation partner, Wested, that I shared earlier, We see this as one of the most important things needing to be faced head on. So again, not just focusing on recruitment and numbers, but looking at the student experience and how they're being supported by faculty, mentors, and advisors. Like we mentioned, not all partner departments will select students through the Bridge program. However, many report that the application process and the following changes have been the catalyst for important conversations within their department. Some have reported higher numbers of applicants and acceptances from students with historically marginalized identities through their typical application process. And I think across the board, our partners are taking a close look at their admission practices, with many implementing holistic admission and rubric-based assessment. And last, I just want to say, reach out to Bridge departments. I think many of our partner departments are excited to talk about the changes they've been implementing, and happy to share resources. And they're, of course, the best direct source of information on how they've been able to implement some of these changes on their campuses. So just to provide a few more specific examples of things our partner departments are doing, I think many have some variation of a first-year graduate seminar to expose the hidden curriculum of graduate school. So this means the unwritten rules and expectations that many students are not told explicitly before arriving. Providing this type of seminar orientation can help head off future misunderstandings by gathering the whole cohort of students on the same page. So in addition to exposing unspoken rules and expectations of grad school, departments have also reported that these can help to build a community amongst an incoming class of students. And almost across the board, our partners have eliminated the GRE. And like I mentioned, many are using rubric-based holistic application review, which allows for a more complete review of the whole student. And rather than focusing on a review of experiences they've already had, which can be based in privilege and opportunity, looking more to focus on the potential for success in graduate school and what types of indicators those may be. Many departments have worked on adding transparency for students, both current students and potential students, to their websites or student handbooks, particularly around how admissions and funding decisions are made. So publicizing this information not only holds or adds accountability and transparency, but it also prompts departments to discuss and define their departmental values and mission, which can tie back to that, creating that rubric. Implicit bias training and other forms of training such as bystander intervention is another thing many of our departments have engaged in, and using individual development plans or IDPs and mentoring agreements. So another way to increase transparency, make the traditionally unspoken rules and expectations part of an intentional conversation, and allow for shared understanding and communication around those things, such as like frequency of meetings, forms of feedback, milestone goals and deadlines, and things like that. Many may have relocation funds or other forms of kind of like startup funding, which can be an incredibly powerful resource for incoming students. Peer mentoring and community building activities can be a very powerful tool. Peer mentoring, we see that a lot. And it's a wonderful tool to connect current students who are a little more experienced in grad school with incoming students. However, it can't be the only tool, because then the onus is on the students. And I think students are really savvy, and they know when there's not department buy-in, or they know if all of the sort of inclusion-based activities are given to the students as their responsibility. So this is a really important tool, but don't make it the only one. And community building activities are wide ranging. I know many departments have struggled to reach the level of in-person engagement since before the COVID pandemic, and we've seen departments get creative on how they're trying to build this in, whether that's through informal activities like lunches and picnics, or eating with students at campus dining facilities, or through more formal events like invited speakers, presentation practice, things like that. And I'll turn it back over to Pranoti.
Thanks, Eva. So if you're here and wondering like how can I apply to be a Bridge partner, that is a process that we will be updating pretty quickly here, because the next application window opens on May 1. This is the annual process. So, even if you don't apply now, you can, sort of get your hands on the RFP and sort of read, what kinds of things you'll need to gather up. So here you can see this is a list of the parts of the application. We want to know about your department as a whole. What is your motivation to become a bridge partner? How are your faculty going to be engaged, in the bridge program? Is their whole department buy-in, or is it just a handful of folks who are going to take the burden of, working with students who come through this program, or what is the case? So you want to make sure you have a good understanding of what we're looking for in the application. Again, as Eva was just talking about mentoring activities, this is really we're finding from our evaluator is a key factor that leads to the success of a student. So it's not just the students mentoring students, but it's also what kind of training and what kind of activities are happening at the departmental level that are preparing faculty to become better mentors or be mentors. What are your admission practices? What kinds of things do you have in place? Is it a single person making a decision, or is it a committee? What kind of rubrics do you use, and so on and so forth. Once you have the student in your department, how is that advising taking place? How are you inducting that student into your department? Like Eva was just talking about those community activities to make people feel like they belong here. So what are all of those things that are happening in your department? How are you measuring the progress of this student? How do you know that they're on track? What kinds of mechanisms do you have in place? Is the student using an IDP? Is there some other mechanism by which you're measuring this? What kind of data do you have in your department? What are you collecting? What have you not collected? Is there reasons why? Why have students left? What are all these things that are happening in your department? It was nice to have a kind of a sense of those numbers and those data as part of your application. And last but not least, what kind of efforts has your department undertaken, to make it an inclusive department and have equity be permeating everything that is happening in your department. So these are some of the parts of the application. And Eva, if you could go to the next slide. I want to jump ahead here and talk about the AGU Heads and Chairs workshop, which is happening in December. A big topic at this year's Heads and Chairs workshop will be the topic of holistic admission. So if you have a department chair, or you have someone who's on your graduate committee that is very interested in attending the workshop to learn more about this, we will devote a lot of time to this topic of holistic admissions. Again, it's on December 8th, which is a Sunday. It'll be in Washington, D.C. It's an all-day event. So the registration for the meeting will open this summer. So if you're interested in learning more, we invite you to come to this workshop. And if you could go to the next slide, Eva. I think we were going to take your questions. And I've been posting all kinds of things in the chat, Eva, while you've been sharing your screen. I will drop this email address in the chat as well, so we can stop sharing slides. We can take down the slides. So we just threw some things in the chat here, just when you interview students, there's sort of a guide on what kind of questions a student might ask you. Of course, the link to the AGU website where you will find the RFP, it'll be posted soon. The application's open on May 1. You can see a map of our partner departments, and of course there is just some other cool, information about a student. Ask them if they want to go to grad school. It's a sort of a flow chart. What we didn't list here, Eva, is also sort of the do's and don'ts, from what we've learned over the years. Yeah,
I'll pull that up now and add that in there.
Yeah, 5 years of applications, we've been able to sort of summarize some of the things you should do in your application versus things you shouldn't do. And so we've compiled all of those to help departments that might be interested in applying, in the future. The things not to do and things to do. So we're happy to answer any questions folks might have.
And if you want, you can also just raise your hand and we can enable your mic. So it looks like, Eric, you've got your hand raised. Let me go ahead and enable your mic for you. Okay, you should be able to unmute Eric and ask your question.
Sorry, my apologies. Thought I was. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciated it, and it provided a lot of insight and perspective on the program. My question comes from is there a size of programs that you're looking at? I'll give you a little bit of context because we have a hydrogeology only master's program, roughly 10 to 20 students enrolled at a time, and only a handful of our faculty work with the program. So, this is something that the faculty that are involved in the program are interested in, but since we don't have full participation throughout the department, would that be a limitation, I guess is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've had departments apply. We haven't had specific programs in a department apply. So that would be the first case, I guess. I don't know, Eva, I'm like quickly thinking through our partners. I mean, we have masters only institutions that are successful, bridge partners. So you don't have to have a PhD program, you can have so I don't know, Eva, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I was just gonna say there's no limit or requirement in terms of size, but like Pranoti said, we haven't had a specific like degree pathway apply. But I think if that's the case and you outline in your application, like describe that faculty buy-in for that specific program and kind of give a narrative and explanation of like why you are applying specifically for that degree program, then we can certainly, pass it along to our review committee and they can take a look. So I encourage you to still apply is what I'm saying. But
All right.
as Pranoti said, it would be a first time for that like specific kind of engagement.
Well, and if need be, we can apply as a department. It's just that, in our case, out of we're geography, geology, and environment department, 15 faculty, but only 4 serve the hydrogeology program. And so but I think I'm encouraged. And so I thank you for your response.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd also encourage you to, though challenging, maybe have those conversations and try to get other folks in the department on board. And I think, all of those degree programs are ones that you could recruit students through the Bridge program. So, and also encourage you to think about applying as a department too. Looks like
Somebody else's hand is
It
up.
looks like Nick, you've got your hand up. Let me go ahead and enable your mic. So you should be able to unmute now.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you both for the presentation today. It was very informative. I'm coming from a department who is on the precipice of applying for the Bridge program, so I'm very excited to get this information. I had 2 pretty much similar related questions related to essentially the expectations or requirements of departments who are enrolled in the program. You mentioned things like virtual meetings and workshops and networking with other institutions. Is there any delineated way that is happening? You had said there were quarterly meetings. Could you just give a little bit more insight into that?
Yeah, so in terms of the AGU Bridge program, we have a fall and spring virtual event for our bridge partners. The events happening through iGen are a bit more kind of like ad hoc basis. So we know that it's impossible to find a universal time where every single person can attend. So all of our departments, are highly encouraged to attend as many meetings and workshops as they can. But it's kind of up to you how you engage. We do require that incoming departments do pursue mentor training, but that can also be like an asynchronous self-guided course, and we have some information about that. So we could probably actually share some of that in the chat too. But yeah, so all that is to say, there aren't necessarily strict, hard and fast requirements for departments. However, we try to encourage people to engage in the resources we provide as much as possible. And if you are recruiting students through our program, then we do have requirements around the kind of reporting that you're submitting once you've accepted a student.
Because once you take a student, we have no way of knowing I mean, yes, we see the students, but not all students come to all the events. So we would have no way to ascertain if the student is still enrolled in your department or did they leave, right? So just once a semester to say, yep, student is still enrolled, they're making great progress, and here's one little, vignette about something great that they did, or they're submitting an abstract, or they got a travel grant, or whatever the case might be. Just it's very short. I think 3 questions or something like that. This way,
Oh,
we know that the student is enrolled in your program.
Absolutely. And I really think the reporting piece is important. I can see why that's so important to the bridge program itself. I guess the fall spring workshops, those are put on by AGU. And
Yes.
okay, so thank you. I was just a little unclear on that.
Yeah.
And then I guess just to dovetail with that question, as far as other initiatives that are taken in terms of once students are within a department, in terms of retention and just providing accommodations or any extra help for the students that are in this program. I mean, you had mentioned a lot of really good stuff. We do a lot of that in our department already for all of the students. I mean, like, most grad students are hard pressed to find housing no matter where we are, right? Unfortunately. So I guess have you heard of, or is there any aggregated list of maybe best practices or specific, I guess, useful practices or whatever things that enrolled departments are doing to improve their retention and improve student outcomes?
Um, I don't have like a published list to share. Maybe that's something we can work on, but I'm just thinking like anecdotally from our annual reports. So those are the reports that are a little different than what Pranoti mentioned a moment ago. So any department taking a student needs to submit an annual report, and that's more of a report out on the department itself and their progress, not the student specifically. So, I think the first year graduate courses are a huge component of that, the IDPs and mentoring compacts, and those community building factors. I think some departments may have more frequent meetings with folks who enter through the bridge program, but not all. And I'm just trying to think off the top of my head of other examples, but it is a bit department specific. And
Yeah,
I'll
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
no,
I'm
that's
just,
fine.
it's just useful we're always looking for new ideas, and it's useful to hear what other folks are doing. So I appreciate your um, thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, and let
Yeah.
me pull up
I'm,
a
I'm
list
also
while you
thinking
talk.
of, Eva, as you're doing that, I'm also thinking of, very creative solutions the departments have come up, the ones that are that have applied to become bridge partners. So I remember one particular institution, and I would have loved to have been in that faculty meeting. So they came to consensus on their overhead from all their grants. They were all going to put all that overhead money into one pot, and that pot of money was going to fund the graduate student in their first year. So they were going to take one graduate student the next time the cycle opened for student recruitment, and they were going to fund that student. It was very creative. I mean, I wish I could have been in that faculty meeting when they came to that decision. So departments have done lots of creative things in, getting monies, supporting students, the kinds of things that they've done for welcoming students, not just students from the bridge program, but all students, right? So if you're doing something for the entire department, it helps all students. So it just changes or increases the morale for all students, including the ones from the bridge program. So there's lots of creative ideas amongst our 53 departments. You're welcome to reach out to these departments if you happen to have one in your neighboring town or state. Please feel free to reach out to them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just quickly glancing at some of our annual reports, and I guess some other things I'll mention that we've seen a few times are like mentoring pods or cohorts. So making sure that students are connected to faculty other than their academic advisor is really important. Also connecting students to affinity groups either on campus or within the larger geoscience community can be a great source of support. And I think, you know, folks also, students can tell whether a department's commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion is surface level, or as Pranoti was talking about, kind of like infused throughout. So we've had departments report on how that's affected their faculty recruitment, maybe like a curriculum review of what kind of resources they're providing students. We had one where they made it a part of all of their faculty meetings to kind of have a portion of the agenda devoted to DEI. So I think, you know, there's no like one answer, but I guess, yeah, just think through like how it can be, you know, not a siloed thing that's happening over here, but sort of a piece of all pieces of your department and students' experience. Easier said than done, but it is
Yeah,
possible.
that RFP is very detailed. You know, take a look at it. We give examples. There are, you know, what counts as a good example of mentoring practice or whatever have you. You know, we give lots of examples. It's a very thoughtful document that we hope that you will use as a guide as you're constructing your application.
Yeah, and I'll put last year's in the chat. This year's isn't posted quite yet, but will be on May 1st.
What other questions can we answer for you? Yeah.
Also, if folks in the room have links to share, you know, please feel free to drop any resources you're familiar with in the chat too.
I can't remember if I dropped the email, our email address. Maybe I did. Yeah, I did. Contact. I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And during the open period for the applications, we also do some office hours, right, Eva? So that, you know, if you have, as you're working on creating your application, you think of additional questions, you're welcome to come to those and, you know, ask us specific questions. What we don't do is read someone's application to say, okay, yeah, you're on the right track, or no, you need lots of work to. We just can't do that. You know, we get too many applications in a year to be able to devote that kind of time. But we do compile them, and we have a review committee, an external review committee that spans, you know, early career to sort of late career folks from different sectors that are reading. And then the student and the early career person on the committee typically says, okay, would this be a place I'd go to grad school? So they have a very different take on their read of the applications. So.
Oh, one other thing I can share, I don't know if I did already or not, but we did come up with a guide for students, questions to consider asking during a grad school interview. And this is a lot of questions, so it's not meant to be a line by line thing for people to read off, but more of a guide for them to match, you know, what's particularly important to them. But I think this can also be a place to start as a department, thinking through, you know, not only how you'd answer some of these questions, but also, is that information readily available on your website? Is it a part of your orientation process? So this can, you know, be helpful. This was made for students, but can also be potentially a helpful resource for you as a department too.
And you'll see in the do's and don'ts for submitting a successful application, I don't think we have actually added this, but we have seen departments that have applied multiple times. Sometimes they just submit the same application. So please don't do that. If you already submitted an application in the past and it wasn't successful, please consider using the advice you got from the review process to, you know, update your application. Don't submit the same thing, because we do check to see if, you know, there has been any changes in application, because sometimes we have departments that apply several times before they're successful. One particular institution applied 4 times, you know, they were finally successful at that last time. So, and we could see in their application the changes that they had made in so many of the different aspects of their practices, you know, and hence their storytelling about those practices. we do check for that.
Any other questions?
What else can we tell folks about this?
Yeah, I was just looking up another resource to share from AAAS, the Diversity in the Law resource, because I know a lot of people have questions around the impact of last year's SCOTUS decision. So
Correct.
I know that I don't think this is updated yet for in response to that decision, but I know they have plans to update these resources in response to that, so that might be helpful. Thanks for coming.
Maybe we can close out the webinar. I don't know.
Yeah, we could go ahead and maybe stop recording, or
Let me go ahead and share the slides again. Just get those reloaded here. And then we can do the wrap up slides.
So in case you're wondering, we will absolutely be sharing this recording. AGI will, send the recording, the link, and potentially even some of these resources we've typed into the chat in an email in the next few days, within a week or so. And again, if you have additional questions about this, please feel free to email us at thebridge@agu.org, or you can also email me directly. My email address is here. If you're a department chair or a department leader, you'd like to join the Heads and Chairs community, we'd be happy to have you as part of that community. And of course, if you're interested in the Heads and Chairs workshop at the AGU annual meeting, we welcome your participation there as well. And if you could go to the last slide. We have a webinar next week, and this is from the Advanced Geo, which is one of those resources we had shared earlier. They have a very exciting new program called Field Safety, and it's for training in the field. And it's a fantastic new course and a toolkit. And we hope that you will be able to join that webinar in preparation for your own field season. And if you've missed any of the previous webinars, feel free to check out this link on AGI's webpage, where all the Heads and Chairs webinars have been cataloged and stored. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We enjoyed talking about the Bridge program, and we look forward to seeing your application. Have a great weekend.